Hey everybody, welcome to Beyond Sunday. This is episode 6, so we're halfway through the year in making Beyond Sunday this podcast. Thanks so much for everyone that's been interacting with the podcast, sharing it out and letting your friends know about it. It means a whole lot. Now, this month we're right in the middle of a jam-packed summer schedule when it comes to our Next Gen ministry. And so today I'm so thrilled to have with me Cory, Evan, and our very own Pastor Jesse that's joining with us on the podcast. Now, Pastor Jesse, starting off with you, we're right in the middle of Mission Jacksonville. What is it? Tell us a little bit about it and what's going on right now.
Well, number one, if we're giving introductions, I have to introduce the best team that you can possibly have. This is Mission Jax. Y'all give it up.
What's up, Mission Jax? Yeah!
Y'all, these guys are heroes and legends, but what we have done is we've set aside this week out of the year where instead of going on an international missions trip or going somewhere else, we want to spend time pouring into Jacksonville, our city, our community. So we've been helping with our sports camp that we've had here. Because of the rain, we've had to make some changes, but we're serving the city in different areas and avenues. Tomorrow we'll be going to a crisis pregnancy center, doing projects, and so it's really just an amazing time for our students to grow, learn, and then to pour out, because as we say in youth ministry here, it's for youth, by youth, and through youth.
Awesome. And generation. Incredible stuff happening at this moment in time. And I guess today we're talking about reaching the next generation. And so why is it important that these students here, but also any students that are out there, learn to practice evangelism and sharing their faith and being bold in what they actually believe in?
Well, honestly, there's a lot of great answers to that. But one, I just think we live in a culture, we like to talk about things. You know, I mean, we're here at a podcast, we're talking about ministry, we're talking about things that we can do. It's really easy to have ideas and concepts. Sometimes we kind of get caught there and we don't actually walk out our faith. Wow. And so I believe that's why this is important to say, look, as much as we'll take time to set aside for worship, we'll take time to honor God's word, we better take time to honor the calling God has placed on our life in the Great Commission to actually take steps of faith. And I told this to our students earlier. It's what the word says. We walk by faith. We don't learn by faith. We walk by faith. Faith is a journey. And that's why taking time to say, we're going to learn evangelism, we're going to practice it, and then we're going to put it into practice, I believe is transformational for any teenager.
It's extraordinary because I think we live in a culture here, especially in the West, Pastor Jesse, where it is a consumer-driven ministry format where we receive from the worship team, we receive from the word, we receive from podcasts, but do we ever actually get to exercise our faith? And let me ask you, for these teens who are back here and who said, hey, I'm going to take a week out of my summer and just pour in and do evangelism and sign up for Mission Jax, what do you think the benefit is on these guys post Mission Jacksonville?
My gosh, do we have another 3 hours? Because the benefit is absolutely incredible. So there is an incredible book called A Defensive Youth Ministry by Ron Belsterling, and in it he talks about attachment theory. And this is one of the things I've learned, particularly for youth. If you have maybe grew up in church and you come from a good family, this quote has always stuck in my mind. The only thing that may cause you to fail for that student is never stepping out where you could fail.
Wow, so good.
For your development. And so the benefit is that you actually learn how to trust God outside of the four walls. Because it's easy to come into a church and I'm safe here. Well, I can worship, I can lift my hands, I don't feel funny. But when now I have to step into my school, onto a beach, into downtown area, and I have to talk to someone, it puts the ball into my court. And I believe that's where God meets you.
That's powerful, Pastor Jesse. And Evan Wilkerson, it's so great to have you on the podcast. We actually interviewed your dad not so long ago. I think it was episode 4 of the podcast. Yeah. And it's great to have you on. Now, I know that you are passionate about a subject, apologetics. And so many people will know what that is who are listening in, but many people will not know what it is. I know when I first heard the word apologetics, I thought, man, is it like a craft for apologizing for things? But
Right.
what is apologetics, and why is it important when it comes to reaching the next generation?
Right, I've heard that too often, that it sounds like you're just constantly apologizing for your faith. That's not what it is. That's not what it's about. It comes from 1 Peter 3:15. The Greek word in that verse is apologia, and it represents to have an answer or a reasoned defense for your faith. So 1 Peter 3:15, always be prepared to give a reasoned defense for your faith. And within that context, it's about honoring Christ. So anybody who honors Christ, any Christians, that command belongs to Christians to have a reasoned defense. And so that's really simplified apologetics. That's what it comes down to. You can give a reason for your faith. You can say why you believe what you believe. And in this culture, that's more important than ever, because there's more criticism, there's more doubts even within the church, and less understanding on how to actually articulate your faith in a very hostile culture. So we set out with my ministry called Faith Answers, a department of World Challenge, to really answer those tough questions and doubts and objections that specifically teenagers have, but also young adults as well.
Oh, that's interesting, because you brought up that there's even doubts within the church. Right. And I know as a teenager, when I was growing up, I certainly battled with doubts. I mean, I would open up and I would read like some parts of the Old Testament, and I would hear of these wars and things that would happen. I'd be like, how do I work this out? So it's one thing to go out in the streets and evangelize, but is it okay for teenagers to doubt and have doubts? And how do they work through those doubts and find truth in the middle of them?
Sure, yeah, absolutely. I believe it is even biblical to doubt. There's a wrong impression about doubt, that if you question anything about your faith, then you're in trouble. You're outside of God's will. And I always point back to Jude 1:22, which says, have mercy on those who doubt. And that's so powerful for teenagers to take away, because first off, it just gets rid of the notion that doubt in itself is a sin. It's not a sin, but where it can be troublesome or a hindrance to your faith is unexpressed doubt. I've been doing a lot of studying on statistics and why teenagers leave the faith, and specifically when they hit college, and it's unexpressed doubt. And usually it's attached to some kind of intellectual doubt. There hasn't been something that they've been able to reason through. Oftentimes it's something within the Bible that they don't understand quite how God's character lines up with some event recorded in the Bible, and they just haven't discussed that. They just haven't found that place to open up about it. And so I think that's one crucial step that we can do with youth in the church, is just opening up about those doubts. Specifically, that's the safe place. That's where we can discuss these issues and then go out again into the culture to talk about these things.
So in a way, it's if you have faith in God, it's also possible to be dealing with doubt at the same time, right?
Right. Yeah. No one has a perfect faith. That means every Christian has some doubt at some point.
Wow. And then I think that the big thing is searching Scripture, getting along people who are maybe a few steps ahead in the journey, getting mentorship, and working through those things are an incredible way to work through that.
Yeah, I always recommend find a trusted source, a godly man or woman who a teenager trusts, and they can just ask good questions, and certainly God will lead that student through that period of time.
Awesome. Cory Ard, so great to have you back with us here in Jacksonville. You're a legend down here in the south. What are we, on the southeast coast or something like that? But anyway, you're a legend around here, and we're glad to have you. The question I would have for you is, just as Cory said, a lot of teenagers, they grew up in church, they hit college, and there's an amount of them that leave then at that point in time. So in our pursuit of being relevant to the culture that we're in at this point in time, is it possible also to have an anchor of truth in that relevance? And how do we not lose truth in our pursuit of being relevant to the next generation?
That's a good question. I think back to when Paul said, I become all things to all men, that I may reach them. And I feel as believers, we have a Father who created the heavens and the earth. He created everything. And so creativity is in our nature. It is in our very nature. And so because of that, I think as believers, we have to really tap in to the creativity that God has given us, and through the Holy Spirit to kind of ask and see, what is it that we can do to stay relevant? What is it that we can do to stay not so far away from the culture, but to actually invite the culture into the church, that we may become all things to all men, that we may reach them without sinning, obviously. Like, we don't invite sin. Yeah. We don't do sinful and demonic things in the church, but there is so much creativity that we, I think, don't tap into because we like our own comfortable bubble. We like doing things our own comfortable way. But I think if we were just to tap in and just ask, like, Holy Spirit, what is it that we can do that would invite and that would bring more and more youth to our church, that would bring more and more young people that want to come here? What is it that we can do? And I think that's an amazing place to start, but I think we have to be culturally minded. We have to think towards that stuff and be intentional.
Interesting. And also, I mean, we sat down yesterday and we had a conversation about social justice. And I know you're passionate about that. That's something that you really want to lead in that aspect of the conversation. Why is it important that we don't neglect that conversation when it comes to the next gen? Because they're inundated with it, and there's sources of that information that may not always be the best places to find truth in it. So how do we navigate through these cultural issues and yet get to that place where, no, this is righteous, this is good, this is a place to move forward from?
I think that we can all recognize and see now more than ever that there are some things in our country that aren't necessarily right and that haven't been right for everyone. And when I talk to a lot of my friends, I'm pushing 30 here real soon, but when I talk to a lot of my friends and I share with them some of the experiences and some of the stories that I've had with racism and injustices, they're blown away because they've never seen any of these things. This stuff hasn't been talked about. Or when we start to talk about some of America's history, they're blown away that they never heard some of these stories. Some of these major stories that have impacted the way that our country is, they've never heard of these things because they're not talked about. Our history books have kind of washed them away and kind of tell one side of the story without revealing, hey, this is a lot of other stuff that happens. And so I feel as a country and as a church that if we start talking about some of this stuff and some of the things that are going on and praying for it and addressing it, that especially for our young people that are coming up, they won't be ignorant to this stuff like some of the people in my generation are right now, and are learning and surprised and shocked, like, now what do I say now? Because I never knew this was happening to one of my closest friends, you know? And so I feel like if we don't talk about it, we're doing them an injustice, that they won't grow up learning some of this stuff and how to deal with it and how to approach it and how to battle against doing some of the things that our country have kind of always done, if that makes sense.
That's so good.
Can I just jump in there? I think this is just such a great thing. Even going back to, like, how do we remain culturally relevant? Because right now that would even be culturally, if like one of the things that's being, hey, this is talked about and addressed right now. And I think just in the context of ministry, I think that youth ministry is not meant to be reacting to culture. I think youth ministry is meant to be pushing culture and creating new culture, because I think, I love the hey, we have to not just bring awareness. I think you have to then move the step forward to go, there has to be a new culture that doesn't pull that out. But now, this is a part where we're all moving together in the way that God had designed. Yes. And I think when the youth have that in their heart, it's a challenge to them, not even as the leaders, we think we're the ones but it's onto the youth. It's your job to create a culture to move forward that's going to look like heaven one day, but it's going to be here on earth. And I think that changes, even in the context of like reaching the culture. I think it changes a little bit of how you look at it.
Yeah, I agree. And off of that, I feel like we've demonized so many different areas of the industry and music and movies and all of these places, we've demonized them so much that now we're trying to get a Christian presence in those places. Because we've removed ourselves so far from everything that was bad that now it's just rampant. And we're trying to find avenues to get back in the music industry and the movies and back into government because we want it to be separate. And I feel like that is the wrong approach. So even for conversations of race in the church, a lot of people would say it doesn't belong in the church. Leave that out. I want to hear, I want my Jesus, and that is it. And when we do things like that, we separate ourselves so far that we don't know how to get back inside. And when you say the youth ministry, we're supposed to be creating culture in a different culture. If we can be proactive now as a church and not reactive, as you said, I think that years from now, we'll be much ahead of the curve when things start to come back up, whether it's race or whether it's something else. Like if we start inserting the church and God and the principles in the Bible and the truths in the Bible into the stuff that's happening now in our world, we'll be better off in the future.
Wow. And I do think that, like, if teenagers don't get their source of truth from the church, if we neglect that conversation when it comes to racial justice or gender identity and all these things that are pressing, pushing issues for our youth that are growing up, they're going to find it in sources outside of the place. So the church has to talk about these things and find biblical perspective in them. And when I look back at these kids and the kids in Radiate and around the country, I mean, one of the things that's within the DNA of a teenager is they want to be a world changer. They want to do something. They want to influence. They want to change. And so normally most revolutions and major change in the world comes through young people rising up and saying, hey, we see between the lines. We see, what's authentic and what is not authentic. And so we want to be a part of bringing just causes on the earth. And so, Evan, for you, is there a way through apologetics that you feel that we can be a part of that conversation of dealing with just causes from a biblical perspective?
Yeah, well, just adding on to Cory's point too real quick, I think that one of the best things we can do in apologetics for youth is to not shelter teenagers from the culture and inevitably they'll be exposed to it one day and have all of these ideas rushing in that they've never seen before and don't know how to handle them. I think one of the things that we can do better as a church is to understand worldview and understand how other ideas, and particularly false ideas, work. And then when they're exposed to those ideas within the safety of a church, within the safety of a godly leader, then they can understand, okay, this is why atheism is false, and I understand that now, and I know how to speak to it, and this is why these cultural ideas on sexual identity are false, and I understand that now. And then with the racial movements and racial justice movements, understanding the most important parts about it and what they're trying to accomplish, where the gospel is put forth and where it brings it under the submission of Christ, that is where we have racial reconciliation. But where it's more of a cultural, political agenda and loses focus of what is the end game of what we're trying to do. We're trying to bring reconciliation, and specifically under submission to Christ. That's we can teach that in the church, and then it becomes about navigating ideas, not being sheltered and then exposed to it out in the open and being bombarded by it, but really being trained in how to navigate these different worldviews so that you can become a bold witness in this culture and not be overtaken by it.
Awesome. And I'm going to change gears here a little bit with you guys and transition, starting with you, Cory, because, Cory, you didn't grow up in the church. You gave your life to Christ in your teen years, I believe. And then Evan and Pastor Jesse, you guys grew up in the church, PKs, pastors' kids, in a lot of ways. And so I want to address that, because I know for these guys here, those who come to Radiate tonight, you know, there could be a friend that comes in for the very first time, some kid who, you know, he just has heard about church. Maybe he's heard the name of Jesus used as a cuss word at times, but has no really understanding of it. What would you say, Cory, in your experience of coming into the church, do we have to have an understanding of, and that we need to do better at reaching the next generation when it comes to unchurched kids walking through the doors?
Ooh, that's a big question. I think I would start imagine, you know, having a high school or a middle school, and you walk a kindergarten student into that middle school. Like, hey, here's your class now. This is your teacher, who's the pastor. These are all the other students, which are peers and other youth group students, and you sit him down there just to learn from day one or in the middle or wherever it's happening. But he's already missed kindergarten, and he's already missed elementary school. Now he's in middle school, and he's having to learn all of this information. I remember coming into the church, and there was so much that was happening. It's a completely different culture. They operate completely different. In the church that I went to, it was the Church of God in Christ, very denominational, suit and tie. So immediately, everything about me had to change in order to fit in to the church culture. And I wanted to serve God so bad that I just fell into it. And that's not the story for everyone. And so one thing that I was taught when I started doing evangelism, it was like a list of 60 different words that I couldn't use. Salvation and the cross and repentance, all of this stuff that we are just so used to saying. It's a part of our culture that when we go out and minister to people, they have no idea what we're talking about. Right. No idea. So we're speaking all this Christianese or this Christian lingo that a lot of people don't really understand. And so I think as we invite youth in, and there's more and more people coming in that do not understand the church lingo, if we can just be mindful of that and be mindful of the things that we're saying and the things that we're doing, and the culture that we're inviting them to is completely different than what they've ever experienced, and be sensitive to that, I feel like it can help a transition from them not knowing Christ to then them knowing Christ. And that's just my opinion. I know Pastor Jesse has done this for years, and you guys have done this for years, but when I think of specifically, like a lot of my ministry is to gang members. I came out of gangs, you know. I gave my life to the Lord the beginning of my junior year in high school, and I was one of the leaders in a 250-plus gang in Colorado Springs, you know. And so it was a completely different culture shock to be running the streets one week, and literally the next week, that's how it happened. I was like, I'm done with this. I'm going to church. I'm living for God. That has to be the only way for God to come and fill this void in my heart. And I walk into the church, and I'm like, oh my gosh, like this is crazy. It's so different. And so I think if we can just be mindful that we've been doing this for so long, and the people who are coming in, they have to learn what we're doing. And so just to have a little bit more grace in how we're handling them and talking to them and walking with them can go a long way.
Wow. And if I could just even add something to that, Cory, because I think one of the things that we do at times is, all right, these kids are on Mission Jacksonville, they're going to have a big hyped week, it's going to be fun, lots of memories and stuff to take place. But the kid who comes in tonight doesn't have that experience. So we can create a divide between our experiences of the high moments, the down moments. We're here for our friends when they go through good times or bad times. We have all these experiences, but the new person doesn't have that experience when they walk through the doors. And there is something about getting out and creating a space where, hey, you don't have to work to get into this community. You don't have to work like what you're saying. You don't have to put on the suit and the tie, but we instantly, this is the family. Hey, we're here for you. We're a part of it, and open up those arms, I think, is so important. Yeah. Go for it, man. Yeah, please.
One more thing? I'd say the other thing is one of the things and the issues that I ran into in doing a lot of outreach and inviting some misfits, as people would call them, into places in the church is that it's when you have people who are coming and looking for a different life, they're coming for a different culture, different community. That's the reason why they're coming to church. They're hoping to find friends in each and every single one of us that we have to be inviting. We have to be open. Yeah. We have to establish community with them within weeks, because they have those friends back home. Yeah. They have those friends back in their same communities that they can go to and do whatever they want. They got the drugs and all of this and that, but when they come to church, it takes more than just one of us to invite them in. You know, that's what it does. If you're not available and I want to hang out with somebody godly and all I know is you, what am I going to go do? I'm going to go hang back with my boys who aren't godly and who don't know the Lord.
So good.
And so we have to be inviting.
It's got to be more than the pastor, right?
It has to be more than the pastor.
It
has to be a team effort.
Can I chime in on this? Because I just think this is awesome and amazing, which is why, for two reasons, why things like Mission Jacks are so important. And then why that should translate into the life of the way, not just we do ministry, but the way we do life. Because for the students that we have here, when we have that new person that walks in, who is it that they attach to? It can't just be a pastor, especially in our day and age right now, especially students. There is more than ever a general distrust for authority. And so it's being peer-led. Because I can go up and say something, or a pastor can, and you're going to have a certain, well, whatever you say, you're paid to say that. You're paid to like me. Right. You're paid to be nice to me. Yeah. Whereas no one's like, a student isn't. And that's the power of going, if we can have an experience with God that translates into, it's not just a good worship experience, but now we have students that when they come, it's a force. Yes. And it's the students who are the ones that are praying. The students are the ones that are leading. The students are the ones that are wrapping their arms. I believe that's a youth ministry that then changes a culture and a people that you can be invited into that, because it's student-led and it's not, up to a pastor or a leader. So good, so good. I love it. Evan, I'm going to go to you, and then we're going to go Pastor Jesse. We're going to land this plane because Cory, you are ready for oxtail something somewhere, and I know I can tell you're ready for it. So Evan, for you, growing up in a Christian home, like a lot of kids in youth group grow up, their parents are Christians. Some of them are forced to be part of coming to the church. Like, what are some of the things, speak to parents, speak to teenagers that this is their life, they're growing up in this environment. What are the things that they need to look out for, and what are some of the things that they should be actively doing right now in growing and having their own walk and relationship with Jesus?
Yeah, well, I would take it case by case. If you're growing up in specifically a pastor's home, it's just different from home to home, and my dad obviously grew up in a pastor's home, and I think there's like a lot of just misconceptions of what that might be like. Of course, sometimes it is very difficult for a PK growing up in a pastor's home and feeling all of these pressures to walk in their footsteps, to become just like their dad, and to become this pastor. But it really wasn't like that for me. My dad was really good about helping me become who God has called me to be, and I think he realized that it wasn't up to him if I became a pastor or not. And just so first off, that freedom is there, and I think that's important for anybody who's growing up into a Christian family, anybody who has Christian parents, and the parents really want their kids to step into ministry and maybe even do the exact same thing that their kids are doing, take over the family business. But God might have something different, Yeah. God might have something across seas. They might be a missionary. They might not even be exactly in ministry, but they can be a witness in the culture, doing they could be an engineer, they could be in technology, but the main thing is to, as parents, to shepherd your children to be what God has called them to be. And what's kind of funny is that my dad kind of let off the reins in that respect, and now God has brought me right into World Challenge, where I am being raised up to work under my dad and under that family business, which is, it's incredible how God works like that. Yeah. So
And no pressure. How many pastors are back in your lineage at this point in time?
Yeah, well, my dad said something like seven
Wow.
pastors or six or seven, and
Wow.
and so yeah, there is that idea like, man, Evan must be having a lot of pressure on his shoulders. Haven't felt it at all. And,
Incredible.
And there, of course, there was a time where I stepped away from the faith, but again, God was using that whole season for a redemptive story that has just empowered my witness.
Incredible. And we appreciate your heart for apologetics, because where so much of the church culture is moving away from anchoring in truth, we're so grateful that you're kind of bringing that emphasis back into your influence in your church. So that's awesome. And Pastor Jesse, maybe the last word over to you on this podcast is, hey, you're pastoring Next Gen here at the Springs Church. You can answer a similar question on that as well, but I probably would follow on to that. And so from your perspective, is there hope for this next generation? Is there hope for a lot of people say, oh, everybody, all the teenagers, all the kids are leaving the church, and all of the stuff that's going on in the world, is just distracting kids away. But is that the case, and is there really hope for the next generation?
Well, I'll answer the first part of that to say I do think it is legitimate that our culture is moving further and further and further away from the things of the Lord as a culture. So I do believe that 100%. But this is in my heart what I believe. I believe in the next 15, 20 years, that church and the way we view it, I think it's going to be flipped on its head. I think COVID started that a little bit, where I don't think it flipped church culture, but I think it got us asking questions about what church could look like. And I believe particularly that the teenagers right here in this room and the teenagers God is raising up, it's not to be, we're going to just follow in the footsteps of what everyone else has done. I believe that there's new territory to be blazed, and there's going to be absolutely brand new things that we've never thought of, ways of communicating the gospel that we've never thought of before. And so I think it's a new season. So to me, I look at the future. There's two ways of looking at it. You can look back and go, well, if we could get God to move the way he used to move back then. I think that thinking is I don't want to say dangerous, but I think it's going to get you nowhere. I believe looking forward to the future is going to be absolutely what God has for us. And so I think it's going to be filled with hope. I think we're going to see more students that are on fire for the Lord, that there's not going to be the story of, most of our teenagers were here and then they left. I believe we're going to have teenagers that are on fire for God, that are going to raise Christian families, that are going to leave Christian businesses, that they're going to leave destiny, they're going to leave legacy for years and years to come. So that's my heart and what I believe. And so I think it's specifically for teenagers to not be afraid to do new things, to not be afraid to blaze new trails. So that's what I believe that the future holds for us, which for the people that have raised in church, it means letting go of some cultural things. So I think that's the flip side of it, is you can't receive something new until you let go of some things that are old. And so I think it's a little bit of saying, God, this wasn't about us, it's not about our culture, our ideas. Lord, would you take the reins for the future and for the vision of the church?
Wow, I'm believing for that too. And it's incredible, because when you look at these teenagers, or there's you pastors that may be listening to this podcast, that in their group there is people who have those songs that have not yet been written. They have those books that have not been written. There is legacy yet to be seen on some of these people. I do believe that, we talk about Billy Graham's, we talk about your granddad, David Wilkerson, who was a significant voice in our country for years. But we think of these people, but right here in this room and around the rooms that are Wednesday night youth ministry is going to be on, God's raising some people up, and there's huge hope for it. Give us a plug real quickly, each one of you guys, for what you're involved in and what you're doing right now. Start with you, Cory. You got an album coming out. How can people connect with you and what you going on real quick?
Yes, sir. I got some new music getting ready to release. I do Christian hip hop, for those of you guys who don't know, and lead worship at my church back in Colorado Springs. But find me on YouTube, Spotify, really anywhere you can buy or stream music at CoryArd.com, or just look up my name, Cory Ard. So,
do you still do CDs?
I still do have CDs.
You do have CDs? What about cassettes?
I've never had a cassette. I may do a special run with just 10 and see if anybody buys them.
10 cassettes?
Just 10
I'll
cassettes.
take one. Yeah, nice. Evan, what about you? How can people plug in and find out what's more is happening with you?
Yeah, sure. So you can find me at worldchallenge.org/faith answers. That's where I do all my apologetics ministry, and I have a lot of topical videos that come out weekly. They're also on YouTube, so if you just go Evan Wilkerson on YouTube, you'll find that, and then my Instagram page is Evan Apologetics.
Yeah, I would encourage even you pastors out there to check out those videos because they're so helpful for kind of connecting the dots and helping bring apologetics into this next generation. Pastor Jesse, while you're giving a plug, hit UCamp as well. We got UCamp coming up, and how can people get signed up for that?
Marvelous, beautiful. Well, for anyone listening, I would encourage you to go to Radiate Youth on our Instagram and also Reach Young Adults. And then third, JSOL, Jacksonville School of Leadership, the 3 ministries here that we have for youth, young adults, and then college, raising them up for those that feel called to ministry. So those are on Instagram and Facebook. And I would say Youth Camp is coming up, which is going to be phenomenal. It's the comeback. We didn't have camp last year due to COVID, so it's called the comeback. We're believing God to do amazing things. We're going to North Georgia, so you can go to tscjax.com. That's where you can sign up and find information about all of that that's coming on. So it's a pleasure and privilege, man, just to be doing ministry with you guys, and love what God's doing.
Thank you.
Wow. Well, Mission Jacks, can you guys give a big shout out to these guys for all the input that they've been giving you guys this week? Incredible. Well, thank you so much for joining us on Beyond Sunday episode 6. So hopefully you'll continue to share this out and help get the message out there. We love you guys and we appreciate you. See you next time.